They figured he was just another easy target, a quiet man, all alone in a roadside diner. But when the bikers pushed things too far, they learned a harsh truth. Some battles are lost before they even begin. The wind carried a sharp, icy bite that afternoon as Darius eased his truck into the gravel-strewn parking lot of Earl's Diner. It was a faded, time-worn joint perched just off the famous Route 66, the kind of place where the world outside seemed to move on while this little pocket of history stood still. The buzzing open sign clung stubbornly to life, flickering dimly against the dusty glass window, a small sign that the place hadn't yet surrendered to time. A lonely gas station sat nearby, its pumps rusted and forgotten, mere relics of an era long gone. Darius turned off the engine, pausing for a moment to glance at the diner. He adjusted his cap, grabbed his wallet, and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. Inside, the diner was everything he expected: checkered floors dulled by years of wear, vinyl booths with seams splitting apart, and a dusty jukebox in the corner that hadn't played a note in decades. The air carried a stubborn mixture of burnt coffee and stale grease, clinging to the walls like a memory that refused to fade. A weary-looking waitress wiped down a counter that was already spotless, muttering something under her breath to the short-order cook working behind her. As Darius stepped inside, the doorbell jingled loudly, cutting through the low hum of the diner like a sharp whistle. Heads turned. Curious, cautious, and heavy stares landed on him. No smiles. No polite nods. Just a cold, lingering silence. At a corner table, a group of bikers sat sprawled across the space, their leather vests dark and weathered, sunglasses somehow staying on in the dim lighting. Their boisterous laughter ceased the moment Darius entered. He could feel their eyes tracking his every step, but he paid them no mind. He adjusted his baseball cap, kept his shoulders relaxed, and chose a booth by the window, always close to an exit. Old habits didn't just fade. They stayed alive, sharp as ever. The waitress approached cautiously, her pen tapping against her notepad as though she were trying to steady her nerves. "What'll it be?" she asked flatly, her voice betraying a trace of unease. "Cheeseburger and fries," Darius replied in a calm, even tone. "And a coffee. Black." She scribbled the order quickly, her eyes darting toward the bikers. They were watching him, like predators sizing up prey. Darius didn't flinch. He simply sat there, calm, tracing the rim of his coffee cup with one finger, as if nothing else existed. But the room existed, and it was starting to shift. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that made your skin prickle, thick and expectant. One of the bikers, a burly man with a thick beard and tattoos sprawled across his knuckles, leaned back in his chair. His voice carried across the diner, loud and taunting. "Well, would you look at that? Seems we've got ourselves a tourist." The others chuckled, their laughter low and guttural, like a warning growl. Darius didn't acknowledge him. He didn't need to. The bearded man wasn't done. "Hey, buddy. You deaf, or are you just rude?" The waitress returned with Darius's coffee, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the cup on the table. He offered her a faint smile. "Thank you," he said softly. She didn't linger. She walked away quickly, her head down. It wasn't her fight to get involved in, and Darius didn't blame her for that. Outside, a truck rumbled past, its tires crunching against the gravel. Inside, the air grew heavier. The calm before the storm, Darius thought. The tension was like a tightly drawn string, stretched to its limit. The bikers had stopped pretending to talk among themselves. Their focus was squarely on Darius now, their stares challenging, daring him to react. Beard Man's lips curled into a smug grin. "Maybe he's just shy," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Or maybe he's lost. Ain't much for his kind out here." That brought a fresh wave of cruel laughter, rolling through the diner like a wave crashing against rocks. Darius remained still, taking another slow sip of his coffee. He didn't flinch, didn't twitch. If anything, he seemed bored. His calmness only fueled their frustration. The scrape of a chair against the floor broke the uneasy stillness. Beard Man had risen, pushing his chair back with enough force to make the sound echo. He swaggered forward, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. The other bikers leaned back in their seats, eager spectators to the unfolding scene. Behind the counter, the waitress froze, her eyes darting between Darius and the advancing biker. Beard Man stopped beside Darius's booth, close enough that the smell of sweat and cheap cigarettes hung in the air. He leaned down slightly, his voice sharp and deliberate.
Hey.
I'm talking to you, boy. The words struck like a slap, meant to provoke, to draw out a reaction. Darius didn't look up. Calmly, he set his coffee cup down, the porcelain clinking softly against the saucer. His voice, low but steady, finally broke the silence. Darius's voice remained even, measured. A simple question, not meant to challenge, but laced with quiet deliberation. It wasn't combative, far from it. If anything, it was polite. And yet, the way he said it, soft and deliberate, was enough to make the biker hesitate, even if just for a moment. Travis, as the burly man would soon be known, narrowed his eyes, the pause brief but telling. You're sitting where you don't belong, he said, his tone low but loaded. Don't you know how things work around here? Behind him, the rest of the bikers stirred. One of them, a wiry man with stringy hair, snickered and called out, Show him. Travis. Teach him some manners. The group chuckled, their laughter like dry leaves crackling in the wind, mean, hollow, and meant to intimidate. Travis. The name seemed fitting for a man so desperate to prove himself. Darius, however, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he exhaled softly, the breath barely noticeable but undeniably there. I'm just here for lunch, he replied, his voice calm and composed, almost as if the conversation bored him. That calmness? It was like fuel to Travis's fire. He didn't just want a reaction, he needed one. Something to justify what he was itching to do next. His fist slammed down onto the table, the force rattling the salt shaker and drawing sharp, startled glances from across the diner. I don't think you heard me, friend, Travis growled, leaning closer. Slowly, deliberately, Darius's gaze lifted, locking onto Travis's face. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't aggression in Darius's eyes. No, it wasn't fear either. What Travis saw was something else entirely. Stillness. A quiet, unshakable stillness that didn't falter, didn't waver. And though Travis didn't show it, that look, it unsettled him. A beat passed, heavy and loaded. Back off, Darius said quietly, his tone firm but not threatening. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even a challenge. It was just a fact. Travis snorted, masking his unease with bravado. Or what? He sneered, his lips twisting into a smug grin. The diner had gone dead silent again, every pair of eyes glued to the unfolding scene. Even the cook behind the counter had stopped mid-flip, a spatula frozen in the air. Travis's patience snapped. You're gonna learn some respect today, he barked. He lunged forward, hand outstretched, aiming to grab Darius by the collar. Big mistake. Darius's hand shot out, quick as a viper. He caught Travis's wrist midair, his grip like iron, stopping the biker cold. Travis froze, his bravado crumbling for the briefest second. Don't, Darius said softly. His voice was calm, still polite, but now it carried an edge, a warning. For a moment, Travis was at a loss. He glanced back at his crew, their eyes on him, silently egging him on. He yanked his arm free with a rough jerk, stumbling back a step as he snarled to save face. Think you're tough, huh? He spat, flexing his hand. We'll see about that. He turned toward the others, throwing out his arms like a conductor readying an orchestra. Get up, boys, he barked. Chairs scraped loudly against the floor as the rest of the bikers stood. 5 in total, each one grinning as they cracked their knuckles, rolled their shoulders, and loomed larger by the second. Darius stayed seated. His posture didn't change. His expression didn't shift. No fear. No anger. Just that same unshakable calm that was beginning to unnerve even the onlookers. The waitress, trembling behind the counter, reached for the phone. Don't, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. Put it down. Travis snapped, his glare sharp enough to cut. She froze, shrinking back in fear. Travis turned back to Darius, his grin predatory. "All right, pal," he sneered. "You've got two choices. Walk out that door right now, or we take this outside." Darius didn't flinch, didn't blink. He reached for his coffee cup, taking one last sip before setting it down gently. The soft clink of porcelain against the saucer was the only sound in the room. "I'd rather finish my lunch," he said simply, his tone so casual it was almost dismissive. Travis's grin widened, though it lacked any real humor. "Fine," he said, cracking his knuckles for emphasis. "We'll do it here, then." The bikers moved in, forming a semicircle around the booth. They thought they had him cornered, trapped. They thought their numbers mattered. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The diner became a stage, and everyone inside an unwilling audience. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the clinking of utensils had ceased. The bikers loomed closer, their shadows stretching long and menacing across the floor. Travis, eager to reclaim his pride, flexed his fists and leaned forward. "Last chance, tough guy," he growled. "Walk out now, or we put you down." Darius's eyes didn't leave Travis's face. His posture remained relaxed, his hands resting lightly on the table. There was no tension in his body, no sign of preparation. He looked bored. That calm? It was maddening. "You just don't get it, do you?" Travis snarled. Without warning, he lunged. The moment seemed to stretch into slow motion for everyone else. But for Darius, it was instinct, muscle memory. He moved, not with panic, but with precision. Sliding out of the booth in one smooth motion, he intercepted Travis mid-swing, catching the biker's wrist and redirecting the momentum. Travis stumbled forward, completely off balance. In one fluid motion, Darius twisted his arm behind his back and drove him forward, slamming him into the table. The loud thud echoed through the diner, followed by Travis's groan as he crumpled to the floor. One down. The remaining bikers froze, startled by the unexpected turn. Darius released Travis, straightened, and turned to face the others. His eyes were steady, calm as ever. "You don't want this," he said softly. It wasn't a threat, it was advice. But bikers? They don't back down. Not when there's an audience. The wiry man with stringy hair was the next to move, charging with a yell, fists swinging wildly. Darius sidestepped effortlessly, his movements smooth and deliberate, like water flowing around a stubborn rock. As the wiry biker lunged, Darius shifted his weight, planting an elbow firmly into the man's gut. The biker wheezed, the air rushing from his lungs, and folded over like a crumpled sheet of paper. Before he could recover, Darius seized the momentum, guiding the man's staggering body into a nearby chair. The impact rattled the furniture. 2 down. The remaining 3 bikers exchanged uneasy glances. The bravado that had once filled their ranks was quickly evaporating, replaced by something sharper, panic. This wasn't a bar fight. This was something else entirely. But they were too far in to back out now. The largest of them, a hulking man with thick arms like tree trunks, reached for Darius's shoulder. It was a mistake. Darius moved sharply, trapping the man's arm in one fluid motion and sweeping his legs out from under him. The biker hit the floor with a heavy thud, the sound echoing through the diner like a drumbeat. Before the man could even think about getting up, Darius knelt beside him, pressing a firm knee into his back. His voice was calm, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "Stay down," he said softly, almost like a teacher offering a gentle correction. The man froze, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. He didn't dare move. 3 down. Another biker, clearly more desperate than confident, came charging from behind, wielding a chair like a weapon. His grip was shaky, his movements uncoordinated, a last-ditch attempt to save face. Darius ducked under the wild swing with ease, his body moving in a single, fluid motion. Rising quickly, he grabbed the chair midair, yanking it free from the man's grip with a sharp twist. Off balance and stunned, the biker stumbled back. Darius didn't waste the opportunity. He stepped in, closing the gap, and with a controlled shove sent the man tumbling into a booth. The biker collapsed in a heap, groaning as he slid to the floor. 4 down. The last biker stood frozen, his bravado crumbling under the weight of what he'd just witnessed. His eyes darted between his friends, bruised, broken, and utterly humiliated, before locking onto Darius. There wasn't a drop of sweat on the man. No signs of strain or fatigue. Darius tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady and unyielding. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a challenge. It was a silent question. You done? The biker swallowed hard, his hands trembling at his sides. Without another word, he turned and bolted for the door, the bell above it jangling wildly as he fled into the parking lot. 5 down. The diner fell into a deep, almost reverent silence. All that remained were the groans of the defeated bikers scattered across the floor. Darius exhaled softly, adjusting his baseball cap with the same casual ease he'd had when he walked in. His gaze swept over the mess, chairs overturned, dishes rattled, and egos shattered. Travis, still slumped over the table, managed to lift his head. Pain and disbelief mixed in his bloodshot eyes as he looked up at Darius. His voice was strained, barely above a whisper. What the hell? Who are you? Darius's expression didn't change. He didn't smirk, didn't gloat. His tone was calm, almost gentle. Just a guy getting lunch, he said simply. Travis glared, his pride wounded far worse than his ribs. You ain't normal, he muttered. What the hell are you? Darius didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the room, meeting the wide-eyed stares of the other patrons. But their looks weren't filled with fear. No, it was something else entirely. Respect, awe, maybe even admiration. He sighed softly and shook his head. You don't want to know. A cough broke the silence. The wiry biker, still slumped in a chair, managed to rasp out, You military or something? Darius ignored the question, his focus already shifting. He turned and walked back to his booth, where his plate still sat untouched. The burger and fries looked almost out of place amid the chaos. His coffee cup sat half full, the liquid inside still steaming faintly. Without a word, he picked up a fry and took a bite, his demeanor unchanged, as if the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. The waitress finally found her voice, stepping forward cautiously from behind the counter. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked, her words shaky. Darius looked up and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine, ma'am." Her eyes flicked nervously to the bikers sprawled across the floor, then back to him. I'll get you a fresh burger," she stammered. "No need," Darius replied, his tone polite but firm. "This one's just fine." In a booth near the back, an older man, someone's grandfather, with a weathered face and hands calloused from years of hard work, muttered under his breath, "Ain't never seen anything like that before." Darius ignored the whispers that rippled through the room. He knew what they were thinking. In a world full of noise, a man who moves with calm precision stands out. People remember that. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a few bills and tucking them neatly under the edge of his plate. Then, without another word, he rose to his feet. The sound of his boots against the floor was the only noise as he walked toward the door. "Wait," the waitress called after him, her voice filled with curiosity. "Who are you really?" Darius paused, his hand resting on the door handle. He glanced back at her, holding her gaze for just a moment longer than necessary. "Just a guy who knows how to finish his lunch," he said with a faint smile. Then he stepped outside, the bell above the door jingling softly as it closed behind him. Outside, the gravel crunched beneath Darius's boots as he strode purposefully toward his truck. The air was crisp, the kind that carried whispers of the past and promises of the road ahead. The biker who had fled earlier stood by his motorcycle, frozen in place. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to mask it by clenching the handlebars.
He didn't speak.
What could he say? As Darius approached, the biker instinctively stepped aside, his posture one of submission rather than defiance. He stared at the man who had dismantled his friends with a kind of precision and control that most could only dream of. Darius didn't glance at him, didn't acknowledge him. His focus was on the truck ahead, the rumble of its engine the only sound breaking the stillness of the parking lot. The door creaked softly as Darius climbed inside, his movements deliberate, calm, as if he had all the time in the world. The engine roared to life, its deep growl slicing through the quiet like a blade. For a brief moment, he glanced into the rearview mirror. The diner stood there, framed against the endless highway, its neon sign flickering faintly in the dusk. Inside, the people watched through the large windows, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Darius shifted into gear and drove off, the crunch of gravel fading into the hum of the engine. The road stretched out ahead, empty and open, a ribbon of possibility winding through the horizon. The aftermath. The bikers would recover. Bruises would heal, and cuts would scab over, but the memory of what had happened would stay with them. It wasn't the pain that lingered, it was the humiliation, the stark reminder that numbers and noise didn't equate to strength. For Travis, the loudest and most arrogant of the group, the lesson hit hardest. In the weeks that followed, he barely spoke. Friends and acquaintances would tease him about the incident, their laughter stinging like salt in a wound. Each time, his face would redden, and he'd mutter, "Forget about it." But deep down, he couldn't. The image of Darius, calm, unshaken, utterly in control, was burned into his mind. In that small diner on Route 66, the story spread like wildfire. Patrons shared their versions with anyone who would listen. "I was there," someone would say, their voice tinged with both pride and disbelief. "That guy barely moved. Took those bikers apart like it was nothing. He didn't even break a sweat," another would add. "Calmest man I've ever seen." The waitress had her own tale to tell. Her hands would tremble slightly as she recounted the scene. "He wasn't like anyone I've ever met. So polite, so still. I asked him who he was, and you know what he said? Just a guy getting lunch." For the people in that diner, it was more than a story. It was a moment that shifted their perspective, a reminder that strength didn't always announce itself with volume or size. As for Darius, he didn't care about the stories or the whispers he left behind. Recognition wasn't what he sought, and validation wasn't what he needed. To him, the equation was simple. You treat people with respect, you mind your business, and when someone crosses the line, you handle it, not with rage, but with control. The road stretched endlessly before him, the miles ticking away like seconds on a clock. He wasn't thinking about the diner or the bikers anymore. His mind drifted back to his days as a Navy SEAL, to missions no one would ever hear about. The faces of those he protected flashed briefly in his memory, people who never knew how close they'd come to danger, or how much had been sacrificed to keep them safe. That was what mattered. Not the noise, not the egos, just the work. The old radio crackled faintly, playing a tune that felt like freedom, a melody that made the road seem infinite. After a while, Darius pulled off at a small roadside gas station. The neon lights buzzed softly in the twilight. He stepped out of his truck, stretching his legs before heading inside. The cashier, a teenage boy with earbuds hanging around his neck, looked up from his phone as Darius approached the counter with a bottle of water. The kid's gaze lingered for a moment, catching something in Darius's stance, something unspoken. "You headed somewhere important?" the boy asked, his voice casual but curious. Darius offered a faint smile as he placed a few bills on the counter. "Nope. Just passing through." The kid nodded slowly, his curiosity growing. "You military or something?" For a brief moment, Darius hesitated, the weight of countless memories flickering in his eyes. Then he shrugged lightly. "Just a guy getting water." With that, he turned and walked back outside, the bottle in hand. The engine of his truck rumbled to life once more, and as he drove away, the cashier watched through the window, a strange mix of respect and wonder settling over him. The quiet lesson. For Darius, it was just another stop along the road. Another town, another fleeting moment. He didn't need recognition, didn't crave attention. But for those he left behind, his quiet strength spoke volumes. In a world full of noise, Darius was a reminder that true power doesn't shout, it whispers. Respect isn't earned through intimidation or bluster. It's earned through control, composure, and the ability to act only when necessary. The strongest people aren't the loudest. They're the ones who fought the hardest battles, the ones who carry their scars silently. So, if this story resonates with you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let it be a reminder of what really matters. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire us to look beyond the surface, to value actions over words, and to find strength in quiet resilience.